We do touch on some heavy topics, and you can always check the description for more details on this episode. The TURTZED podcast and content in this episode is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. Neither I nor my guests are healthcare or mental health care providers, and we are not licensed or authorized to provide professional medical advice. For more information, please see our policy at TURTZED.com. From the creeping to uncontrollable fires he fought, there was no hotspotting in his fight with his own addiction until he hit his own personal fire break. And now he's helping others build anchor points in their own battles with addiction as the youngest interventionist on intervention. Zach, welcome to TURTZED.
Thanks, man. That's a hell of an introduction. I wish I could just have you just follow me around places.
I love that creativity. I like putting those words together and figuring out how to connect two things, which obviously we'll discuss today.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it'd be really cool to walk into rooms and just have you there.
Have me introduce you.
As he couldn't put out hot spots in his... Oh, dude, I love it.
I'll find other ways to infuse fire terminology throughout today's conversation.
Yes, let's go.
All right. Well, I actually want to start today a little bit differently than I start other conversations, because I think that when you're talking about your own personal struggles as well as what you do now, I think it's really important to talk about why you feel so passionate about speaking so openly about addiction and the battles that you faced in your life.
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, man, I think the real truth is just I was so quiet about stuff for so long, especially early in my recovery. I mean, in my addiction, I tried to hide everything. It turns out I wasn't very good at hiding stuff. Seems like everybody already knew what I thought I was revealing, this big secret of drug addiction and alcoholism. Everyone's like, yeah, man, kind of could see it from a mile away. But in my mind, I thought I was hiding it. And then when I got sober, it wasn't that I was so much afraid of letting people know I was in recovery. I actually had no fear about that at all. But actually using my voice to be vocal about recovery, that I had a lot of fear around. And I think a lot of that just had to do with my upbringing of just fall in line, be humble, fit the mold, and just move forward with the crowd. And nowadays I'm just more along the lines of, I don't want to.
When you talk about that fear, what did that stem from? Was it a fear of acknowledging the addiction, or was there a fear around talking about it or jinxing it?
No, it wasn't a fear of it. The fear had nothing to do with me and my own recovery. I think or being judged for being in recovery. I was, by the time I got sober, I think I was at a point where I just didn't care anymore about what other people thought about that. This is something I have to do, or I'm going to die. Right. And especially since, hell, man, in my addiction, there's flat lines in my story. I've already done the death thing. It didn't work for me, right? But I think what the fear really had to do was, I think it was really just in relation to me. I'm afraid that I have nothing to actually offer, because in my mind, at least the story that I told myself was, I've never had anything to offer. And in hindsight, I see that statement as untrue, but in the moment it was really moving past that, getting the self-worth as far as my own recovery goes to be vocal about it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. How early did that start, that feeling like you couldn't offer anything?
Young. I wish I could put a stamp and be when I was 5. I really can't, but I know in my adolescence. Where did it stem from? I came up in a very military family, and both my parents were naval officers. And when I say that, people tend to get this image of what that probably looked like. It's you will make your bed at 0600, you will do, and that wasn't it at all. My parents were not that super cool. Me and them are very close, but there was always just this kind of overbearing weight of what felt like expectations and standards that I just never felt like I could fulfill, and so I was always kind of comparing myself to my mom and my dad and my older brother, and where I saw them in my head was way up here, and then I saw this big gap, and then me somewhere down here, right? So in my head, I never could do it, mom, captain of the honor society, officer in the Navy, dad, similar, even very high-ranking officer in the Navy. I never even smoked a cigarette, yet alone a joint. You know, and we had those were the standards and like the expectations in the home. Brother, commercial real estate, big success there, and then there's me.
When you were growing up, were you passionate about anything that wasn't necessarily militant in terms of maybe it was creativity or sports, or what was that like for you? Where were your passions lying? I
found my solace in hockey.
Okay.
Of all things. I loved playing hockey, and that was my life through middle school into, I want to say like freshman, sophomore year high school, somewhere around there. I got kicked out of a lot of schools when I was in high school. So eventually I landed at a school where like it just wasn't big enough to have any kind of hockey. And that got washed out right there. That and riding skateboards and just catching fish, that was kind of my thing growing up. I loved those three, and those were my three avenues that I found, like I said, solace in, really.
Hockey a little different because obviously it's a team sport, but the fishing and the skateboarding, you could be out all day just doing that. There's no goal in mind. There's no agenda. It's just being out in nature, kind of going through life and experiencing it. When you look back to your adolescence, and as you mentioned earlier, when you sort of moved through these schools, when did you first start experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and did that impact the things that you like to do, like skateboarding and hockey and fishing?
You know, a lot of the interests I already had when I found alcohol for the first time were already in place. But at the same time, with the outlets that I had, I mean, drinking was congratulated. It just fit the environment. I mean, the hockey players were the party guys. They were the drinkers and the pot smokers. And, you know, fishing is, I mean, come on, we think about fishing, hanging out.
I mean, we're in Nashville. You crack open a beer and you go fishing.
Right. I mean, I don't think it doesn't take much to put two and two together there.
Yeah.
And then, you know, skateboarding was skateboarding and the culture that comes with it.
Yeah.
You know, so kind of like more like that punk rock, alt attitude, demographic. And dude, I fit right in. And I found the first time I had alcohol, I was probably around 10 years old. Irish family, right? And they would give us glasses of wine at holidays like Christmases, New Year's Eve, stuff like that. And you wouldn't get drunk, but it would be, you know, it'd just be like a little glass of, give the kid a glass of wine type of move. And I remember the first time I drank that though, like my reaction was not normal. Like I could still very romantically remember that first glass of wine and how it tasted. It was red wine, and how it tasted and how warm it felt going down my esophagus to my stomach and then out towards my extremities. Like I very vividly and romantically can remember that. And when I had that drink, it wasn't like a conscious connection in the moment, but at the same time, now I very clearly remember like finally feeling like I'm a part of this family. Right. And then keep in mind, nobody in my family was abusing me in any way or pushing me out. Like I'd been welcome the whole time, but in my mind, based on these standards that are already in this family system that I'm comparing myself to, I don't fit here. But when I had that drink, I fit in. At least that's how I felt. Like I said, I remember that warm feeling going out to all my extremities and stuff like that, and thinking, man, I want to feel like this all the time. And that became like my life's mission going forward from pretty much 10 years old until the time I turned 28 and eventually got sober. So for 18 years, all I wanted to do was just stay drunk or high in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And I either got really good at that or really bad at that. Depends on how you look at it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's a double-edged sword because as you're describing, it's the way that you felt like you fit in your family. And at the same time, it's something that you could very quickly lose control of. Yes. And between the age of 10 and what I would assume is around 13 or 14 when you were in high school, things seem to escalate rather quickly. when they started escalating, how quickly did it escalate to getting in trouble for the first time?
Pretty quick. So like I said, I started drinking around 12 or 10. By the time I was 12, I was drinking regularly. I have one sibling. He's my older brother. He's 4.5 years older than me. So, you know, when I'm 12, he's 16 and 17 years old, getting ready to go into college. So like he's experimenting with all this stuff.
Right.
So my brother never really like pushed this on me, but at the same time, through him, I had access early. Right. So for me, once I had that access, my trajectory of use went like this. I mean, I started smoking weed when I was 12. And then I got my first legal consequence when I was 14. I got of all things, first arrest was burglary and criminal mischief. And the charges sounded real serious compared to what we actually did. It was me and a group of my buddies, and we got tore up when we were 14. And we broke into this warehouse that to this day, I would swear was abandoned. It wasn't. And we had like a fire extinguisher fight and a bunch of just, you know, drunk juvenile kid type stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess somebody had seen us break into the building, called the cops. And I remember thinking too, when the cops pulled up and they arrested all of us, put us all in separate they put us in cop cars, but there was 4 of us, 2 people per car. And I could see my other buddies in another car, and they're freaking out and they're crying, and the buddy next to me is freaking out and crying.
It's the prisoner dilemma.
Yeah, and I knew I was in trouble, but at the same time, I was just like, whatever, tomorrow's Saturday.
Yeah.
It just, once again, just a not really normal reaction to the rest of everyone around me.
There's a level of calmness in terms of your reaction.
Yeah.
Was that the reaction you received when you came home with your parents?
It wasn't the reaction I got from them. It wasn't calm, but it wasn't angry. It was more just like a.
Was it factual? Like you did this.
Yes and no. Yes and no, because with my dad, it was very factual. It was very, you know, X plus Y equals Z. That's just kind of how he thinks, black and white. Whereas my mom, it was very the other side of that same coin, where it was very more emotional over factual. And that makes it hard to differentiate between, like, as a 14-year-old sitting there looking at 2 parents, it makes it hard to differentiate as like, all right, like which is the reaction I'm supposed to be feeling? Is it this black and white X plus Y equals Z kind of thought process, or am I supposed to just be very emotional? And as a result, I was kind of neither.
Yeah.
Like I was just like, all right, I know I'm in trouble.
When you look back at that point, was there a level of fear with moving forward around getting in trouble, or did that lack of reaction on your part and then having 2 very different reactions of emotional and factual play a role in sort of the confusion around how you should feel when it came to getting in trouble and your own personal experience?
Well, I think my initial fear in the moment was, you know, and this is the addict side of me, was, am I still going to be able to get high? Am I still going to be able to get drunk? Because I had a strong feeling I was going to be on probation in some capacity. I mean, I knew I was 14 and sitting on, you know, I mean, may sound serious, but
Yeah.
burglary charge. So I was like, all right, I might get probation and I might have to take drug tests. And that seems like a real buzzkill that I'm not interested in doing. That was really all I could think about then. Like, I didn't have any really deterrence from that as far as what I should do, what I shouldn't do, what's going to happen if I get in trouble again. All I cared about was, can I still get high? When's court? Because once I go to court, like, I'm getting sentenced, and if I'm getting probation, I'm getting it then, and that's when they're going to start drug testing me.
Interesting.
Uh-huh.
And it's almost as if, as you said in the beginning, it's more around, can you hide it? Can you hide the fact that you're doing it and still sort of compartmentalize that you're getting in trouble, you have to go through this path, and also how can you go down the other path of drinking or smoking and hiding that so that the two paths don't cross?
Yeah, and the compartmentalization was just a survival mechanism, so I can live two lifestyles at the same time, because I still have these family standards, but then I have my individuality and my standards within that, but then I also have what I didn't know at the time, but soon to be crippling case of alcoholism and drug addiction. So now I'm really doing three things at the same time. And the older I got, the more I had to compartmentalize, the more avenues I was in and the more lives I was living separate all of one another simultaneously, until I eventually just didn't even know who I was anymore.
At what age do you feel like you lost yourself?
Probably 18, and then probably again in my mid-20s. For me, that was like a two-parter.
So let's dive into the first part first. What was going on in your life around 18?
So around 18, I actually, well, before we go forward, let me go backwards a little bit. When I got that first initial burglary charge, I actually got kicked out of, this was in the summer too. I got kicked out of public school as a result of that, which part of me was impressed, and a part of me was like, how you get kicked out of a public school in the summertime? And I had been a walking behavioral issue up until then, so it was really one of those things where like they caught wind of it and called my folks and were like, we're not kicking him out, but like, we would appreciate it if you didn't come back type of conversations. So I went to
sorry, not to interrupt you, but that actually ties directly to what you were talking about earlier, where it's that feeling of not feeling good enough. And to be kicked out of a public school is unbelievably confusing, especially as a teenager when everyone goes to public school. It's supposed to be offered to everyone. And it wasn't necessarily something you did in school while school was going on. It was something that happened outside of school, and that same messaging is compounding again for you that you're not good enough and that you can't be here.
Yes. I was like, damn, dude, this is like getting fired on a weekend, from a job. I was like, I didn't even. So I go to this other school, and it started in September, and by Christmas I'd been expelled from there. I went to a men's boarding school for people just like me. And I managed to stay there for about a year, and I got kicked out also for drugs. Went to a wilderness program, and then went to a therapeutic boarding school up in the Adirondack Mountains in western Massachusetts. And there I thrived. I did really well there. I graduated a year early. I got to be valedictorian, like give the speech and everything. That's where I got into fighting fires originally.
What made you thrive in that environment?
I think the structure and the fact that I could become hyper-focused on a goal. Because now what I was doing, there was a point to it. Because prior to this, I had no clue about firefighting as an option for me. My uncle, who was really, my paternal uncle, my dad's brother, he was really on a pedestal in my life. My dad was too, but my uncle was he was a career firefighter, and then he became a fire marshal, and he started putting a bug in my ear about it. Like, hey man, like you're all about the outdoors, you like fitness, you are seemingly addicted to adrenaline. This checks all those boxes. I'm just saying, why don't you take a look at it, and maybe that's an option for you. Like, you don't have to go to college. And all of a sudden, like, my ears perked up. And I remember I was at this therapeutic boarding school, and I was talking to my therapist and some of like what is the equivalent of like a treatment team there. They were trying to figure out what the hell to do with me, to be honest. Because even there originally, like, I was a walking problem for them. And I told them I think I might want to explore fighting fires. And they were awesome because they plugged me in with the local volunteer fire department of that town, and those guys just took me under their wing. And even as a teenager, I was 17 years old, but I got the green light from my parents to go ahead and do whatever they do. So there was no restrictions on me just because I was 17. If they had a fire, I could fight. And they got me trained, and through them, I met another guy who did wildfires in the summer times, and he started talking to me a lot about that. And it seems like I just have this natural ability to be attracted to things that can kill you quick. And he was telling me about how dangerous that was and how much adrenaline it is on a daily basis instead of just kind of sporadically. And I was like, dude, I got to do this. And the same school let me leave for, I think it was 2 weeks, to go to the Colorado Wildfire Academy and learn how to fight wildfires and come back. And that way, once I graduated, I knew I can go, because they need bodies in this line of work. They don't have enough people to do what they need done. So they'll take anybody who's qualified. So I can hyper focus on this goal, and all of a sudden I bulldozed through school. I think I went from pretty much like a straight CD student to pretty much straight A's with what seemed like minimal effort. I was like, holy shit, like I just have to listen and like kind of just do the assignments, and they I didn't even know. You know, this is how little I knew about schooling and things like that. So once I had this goal, I was very determined to be like, this is it. I'm doing this. And that's how I got there. As far as when did I lose myself at 19, once I graduated, 10 days after graduation, I wrapped my first car around a tree. And that was DUI number 1. And that one almost killed me because I got trapped in the car. It was cold. I almost froze to death. But I was like, oh no. Like, I'm about to go fight wildfires. Now I have this DUI. I can't do that now. And that got postponed for a little bit. And I at that point, I just didn't know what to do or where to go or who to be or anything, because I had just wrapped up my identity so much in this one desired outcome, this one goal, that when I didn't lose it, but it got postponed, now I was in like this no man's land of, I don't know, do I go left, right, run in circles? And I was lost.
When before you were lost and got your DUI, were you drinking and using drugs while you were fighting fires at sort of the end of that boarding school and when you were in training? Or did that not reoccur until after you had already gotten out of that school?
It was very intermittent while I was in that school, because this was the last stop. This was for guys and gals who had been kicked out of everywhere. The whole school was maybe 120 people, and just people who had no other options. So you were there 24/7. Staff lived there. If you left and came back, you were immediately searched, drug tested, breathalyzed, everything. And this was in the middle of the Adirondack Mountains. You really weren't going anywhere without staff taking. So the option of getting drunk or getting high while you were there was virtually zero. But when I would go on home passes, because I was there for 15 months, and when I would go on home passes for a week or something like that, oh yeah, absolutely, I'd be making sure that there's cans of dip and cigarettes and cases of beer and everything else, but I knew I couldn't get high. So I didn't, because I knew I was going to get a drug test as soon as I went back. So I'd go home, get drunk. When I went to the Wildfire Academy, once again, I clicked up with those guys, and a lot of them were guys who were coming out of the military, and they were getting hammered every night, so I was right there with them. But it wasn't consistent when I was at that school, just by virtue of lack of access, really. But I never said, I'm going to be sober. I was like, I'm not going to get high. I'm not going to smoke weed. I'm not going to do coke. But I'm absolutely going to drink. Because that was my baby of all of them.
Did the adrenaline replace that for you when you were in the midst of fighting fires?
Yeah, for sure. I've said it for a long time. If somebody can bottle adrenaline, that would be my drug of choice, for sure. As
you look back at fighting fires, going from fighting fires to getting your first DUI, when you look at obviously the consequences, as you said, of not necessarily being able to go back and fight fires, and you'd worked so hard to get to that point, when you started to lose yourself at that point, how did you handle those consequences compared to when you were handling the initial consequences of breaking into the abandoned warehouse?
So with these ones, I just swan dived into drinking and drugs. That was how I quote unquote handled that whole situation. I was like, let me just blot out. My whole life I've had what I call an off switch. Right? I mean, what we know it now is, disassociation. But once again, for me and everything that I did, that switch was like a survival mechanism. And I got really good at flicking it off. But the more I flicked it off, the harder it was to turn it back on. And I think that was one of those time periods where I really I hit that switch. I hit that off switch. And I got some BS job at a grocery store, and I was like, I can't believe I'm working at a Kroger doing nothing. I should be out there fighting fires, yada yada. You know the story that I was telling myself. But once again, those thoughts would come up, and I would just blot them back down.
I guess as you talk about pushing down those emotions throughout your life, when you were, or I guess between the two periods in your life when you felt like you lost yourself the first time to the second time, was there ever a moment where you felt the emotions ever, or was it completely disassociated and bottled up or pushed down through the use of alcohol and drugs?
For the most part, completely off. It was like a very robotic existence, to the point where I actually started to get a little bit concerned about that. Because I was essentially, there was a conscious moment in all that where I was like, man, you're just not feeling anything. And I was thinking, that's alarming. That's not normal. But I also did not know, like, that was just like the tip of the iceberg. Like, eventually that got much, much, much worse. But that's really where my head was around it. It was very, very brief, intermittent moments of emotionalism around all of that. But I always met that with, like, nope, where's my switch? And let me smash that switch.
Do you feel like when you got sober the last time, that is when there was enough emotion there that concerned you, that is what got you sober? Or was there something else that drove it?
My entry into recovery.
Your entry into recovery.
Yeah. So my entry into recovery came on treatment center number 6. I've been in and out. With the DUIs, I actually got a couple more fighting fires. And learned a trick, though, that you can drive government vehicles without a license as long as you were a government employee. So I would just drive their trucks everywhere instead of my own. And that was kind of my workaround.
You became very good at finding ways around your consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to.
Yeah.
It was, once again, it was like, what do I have to do to allow this addiction and alcoholism? What do I have to do to allow my ability to do this over here and drink continue? And whatever it was, I was going to do.
And also pursue the passion of fighting fires, regardless of the adrenaline or the excitement around that. That was really the first goal that you felt good about and accomplished in your life, becoming certified or getting the credentials you needed to do that.
Yeah. And that got eventually washed out too, because I just kept getting in trouble with alcohol. And eventually that opportunity was no longer an opportunity. And that's where I lost myself, really, like the second time. Yeah.
When that completely went away.
And my solution to that was, well, I've been working 6 months a year. I had no wife, no kids at the time. I'm going to go to Florida. So I just moved to Florida, and I stayed down there for 5 years, and eventually came up north Tennessee. And that's where I got sober. And there's a whole long story around that, but I think what really happened was I just ran out of lies that I can tell myself and the people around me. I think I just got caught, essentially. Maybe not by the law, maybe not by, her or parents, but by circumstance. Everything just caught up. And there was one night where I was at a bar in Dixon, Tennessee, and I was drinking, and I got the great idea that I was going to get some Coke, and my Coke guy had no Coke, but he had heroin. And I was like, good enough. And I ended up getting a bag of dope. And there was no dope in my dope. It was just straight fentanyl, and I was out. So I died, flatlined. According to the paramedics, I was dead for 5 minutes, and I'm not supposed to be here. From a medical standpoint, like I'm supposed to be dead or a vegetable. And when I came back from that, and I came to, and I'm lying in this hospital bed, I got cops all around me asking me questions, because I had the bag on me. So I mean, if they wanted to throw the book at me for possession, like they absolutely could have. They didn't. But I remember lying there looking at the ceiling, and I vividly remember there was a policeman on the side of my bed to my right, and he's talking, and I'm just staring up at this tile ceiling. And all I could think about was like, dude, I can't picture my life continuing to do this. But at the same time, like the thought of not doing it, I couldn't picture that either. And it was almost like I was at like this fork in the road, and it feels like there's a cliff regardless of which way I go. Cause I'm like, I don't know what this looks like anymore. Like I didn't think I was going to die, flatline. I had overdosed several times before that, but I never like been like, hey man, you're supposed to be dead right now. I've never had one of those situations. So I was like, if I go left and I continue to go down this route, I just don't know what it looks like anymore. But if I go right, like then I have to face life without drugs and alcohol, and I have even less of an idea of what that looks like. And I was just kind of like at that jumping off point where I was like, I don't know what to do. And right there and then in that moment was when it was like, you have to make a decision, and whatever it is that's going to alter the rest of your life.
In that moment, I can't imagine how tough that would be to feel like those were your only two options. Mm-hmm. What inside pushed you to recovery? Because both of those, as you describe, are a cliff. One is facing every consequence of every action you've ever taken.
Yeah.
And the other one is not being here anymore. I can't even imagine what that moment was like.
For me in the moment, I remember I was mostly angry. I was so angry. I was angry I woke up. That's what I was angry. I was legitimately livid that I lived. And at the same time, the thing that pushed me to recovery was there was actually two parts. One, there was a girl that I was with at the time named Trisha. God bless her. One fantastic woman, not an alcoholic, not an addict, just a really good woman that essentially through my addiction, like I was dragging through the mud, and she was staying with me. And I essentially agreed to go to treatment for her. Mm-hmm. And I say that because there's this myth that I always hear of like, you got to get sober for yourself. You got to do it for you. That's garbage. That's not true. I mean, think about it. In the moment, I hated myself.
Yeah.
I hated myself. I hated the things I was doing. I had just come back from Florida, which was, I mean, I'd love for a prettier way to say it, but I mean, that was just a life of very, very violent crime. And so I hated the things I was doing. I hated the people I was around. I hated why would I do anything that related to me? I hated, because I hated myself. So why would I do something that good for me? Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But for her, I was like, I'm going to do it, but I don't think it's going to work, because I'm now going into treatment number 6. And like, guys, I had done this 5 times. Done this.
Yeah.
Right. But whatever, we'll do it a 6th. And then the other part was my dad, because Trisha found me. If she didn't find me, well, then I certainly would have been dead. She's the one who called the paramedics, everything else. But she called my dad that night. And, you know, granted, I don't know what time it is, but I know it's after midnight. I know it's very, very... I know it was one of those times where it was either very late night or very early morning, kind of depending on how you look at it.
Yep.
And my dad answered the phone, and he talked to Trisha, and Trisha told him what had happened. And I remember I talked to my dad later, and he hit me right between the eyes, because in a nutshell, what he said was, Zach, I love you, and I have known that phone call was going to come for a long time. Like, I knew for years that my son was dead. And I accepted that. He told me he'd even buy me a plot. He's like, you got one. But the only thing I never figured out how to do is tell your mom. He's like, how am I supposed to tell your mom that? And he got me. He got me good. And it was the way he said it, because he didn't say it with any kind of judgment. He didn't say it with any kind of anger. He just said it in as kind and loving and a compassionate way as possible. And he was asking me so genuinely, like, how am I supposed to tell your mom her son's dead? And I didn't have an answer. And right there, like, I'm looking at Trisha, and I can see the look of just hurt and just pure fear on her face of, like, what's going to happen to this guy if he leaves this hospital. And at the same time, I'm hearing my dad come through the phone, and I'm hearing the fear and the hurt in his voice. So I did it for them. I did not do it for me.
Well, I think regardless of how it starts, I think, to your point, it doesn't matter whether it's for you or for someone else. It's the fact that it pushes you to get there. And I think what touched me so much listening to you talk about that was your dad finally connected his factual to the emotional of your mom. It really tied both together and made it so that there was no confusion there for you.
Yeah.
It was as clear as day of what would happen and what the consequences were, that he would have to tell her that. And it's heartbreaking to hear. And I can't imagine how much strength it takes to talk about moments like that. And I'm 100% positive that you continuing to tell that story inspires others to find those moments for themselves of whether it's for someone else or for themselves, that they're able to, whether it's the first attempt or the sixth, find their path to recovery. In that moment, what did the beginning of that path of recovery look like for you when you left the hospital?
So at first, and this is where it's kind of, to me, it's just the right people have always been in my life at the right time. 100%. Since I had been through treatment several times prior, there was a couple guys that knew me from before, and they showed up to the hospital because there was no place to put me. My fifth treatment center was in Middle Tennessee. It was way out in the countryside. 12-step immersion program. It was awesome, but I wasn't ready. But I really wanted to go back there, and they just didn't have a bed. So two guys from there that I knew pretty much kidnapped me. They scooped me up from the hospital. They took me to their house. I mean, it was a good kidnapping. Like, they were feeding me steak and, like, watching Netflix and stuff. Like, it wasn't all bad. But they held me there, and made sure I was detoxing safely for as long as it took to get me into some place.
To the rehab.
Yeah. And they got a bed, and they drove me right on over there. And when I got there, my attitude was still the same. I'm doing this for her. I'm doing this for them, but I'm not buying. I still think this is a waste of your time, your resources, my time, my resources, really my dad's resources. I wasn't paying for it, you know. And I don't see this working, guys, but I'll try. And it was really, honestly, it was probably about day 28 out of a 30-day stay where I finally committed to it, where I got sat down in the office. And keep in mind, like, these people that I knew in Tennessee were pretty much all in recovery at the time, because I came to Tennessee for recovery, for treatment center number 5. So these two dudes who were my friends, they were also working, in the treatment center. It didn't matter what treatment center I was going to in Middle Tennessee. Some of my friends were going to be working there. And I listened to them because they finally sat me down and they were like, dude, but they shot me straight. Here's what's going to happen. And you know it. So stop pretending. They basically took my ego and just snapped it in half over their knee. And I said, okay, I'm a swan dive into this. For 6 months, though. Only 6 months. After 6 months, I'm not doing it. And they were like, great. They knew what would happen. I swan dived into it, and all of a sudden, it eventually started to become for me because I started to actually experience what recovery had to offer. I got to experience what the fellowship I'm involved in had to offer, what the solution had to offer, how so many of my assets at the time could become liabilities, and I could use them to help people. What that had to offer, and all these guys just showed me how to do this in day-to-day life, and they made it look attractive. They made it look real sexy. I was like, dang, you got a girlfriend? It's like, dang, you got a car? How do I get one of those? You got a credit card? How do I get credit?
Yeah.
But they literally taught me how to do everything.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, I really, really fell in love with recovery, and I started to do it for me. That's where, like, that pivotal shift happened. Having said that, though, today, I'm kind of back to square one. I don't do it for me. I don't. I love recovery. I don't mean that as like I'm leaving recovery today when I leave here. I just mean if I continued to do it for me, I think it would be a very selfish reason. I think for me, what that would look like, let me get all I can out of recovery for me, and what I can get and have and yada, 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 instead of what I can give away and who I can help and everything else. So I think today it has more to do with the responsibility of I got shown this process. I'm responsible to do the same for other people now.
It's interesting, the comparison to your recovery and diving into a program that helps you not only recover, but you're helping others, and the goal of becoming a firefighter. And in both cases, they were things that got you sober, and they're both, when you're helping fight a fire or helping someone in recovery, they're completely out of your control. They can be wild, fire or recovery, and you thrive in both. And as you said, part of your recovery is helping others. And I think the healing part of recovery is in anything, whether it's from depression, anxiety, addiction, that healing is only as good as the stories we can share and how we can help others. And that is part of being on the healed side, of looking at it as there is a reason you went through all that. There is a reason that you're able to take the knowledge that you've learned and help others. How do you handle being in that environment day in and day out with other people experiencing very difficult moments or interventions, and also have your own autonomy and your own sense of self without them merging?
Yeah, there's, I've seen this happen to a lot of people who work in the recovery field, where their jobs become their program. And for me, I just have to keep those very separate. I mean, just, for being in agreement with the different traditions of these programs, I'll leave which one I'm in out. But, I do work a 12-step program, but then I have my professional life. And I do a lot of helping of a lot of guys in early recovery on both sides. And it's just, for me, it's kind of having a little bit of like that separation.
Back to the compartmentalization, but a healthy version.
Yeah. I think compartmentalization, when it's used correctly, sometimes we can just refer to those as boundaries, in the right context.
Absolutely.
And for me, it really has to do with myself, because otherwise it would become very easy for me to be like, you know what, like I helped that family today. I don't need to meet with this guy I'm working with in this other program over here today. I already did some stuff like that. And at the same time, when I'm being compensated for, I'm just doing on a spiritual and altruistic plane, just trying to be helpful. And for me, there's a big difference between the two. So I try to keep it separate like that.
It's interesting that you started by having it combined, and then as recovery has gone on, you've found two different paths with those. As you look at what you've experienced in your life, if there was someone listening today that thinks that they might be struggling, what advice would you give them about starting the process of heading into recovery?
Just try. I know that sounds so elementary and so simplistic, but at the same time, I lived in this delusion that I did recovery for a long time, and as a result, it didn't work. But I never really did all of it.
Yeah.
I never got to experience the side of things where I can be of help to somebody, even at 2-3 weeks sober. Because just speaking from experience, the guy who has 3 weeks sober is going to connect to the guy who's 3 days sober way more than me. I might be able to connect to the guy that's 3 days sober, but is the guy that's 3 days sober going to be able to connect to the guy that's 7 years sober? Probably not going to be very fathomable to him. The guy with 3 weeks, though, the guy with 3 days is all of a sudden like, yo, how'd you do that?
Yeah.
3 weeks? Like, for real? Not even Xanax? Like, so I never got to experience that side of things. For me, if the one thing I would say to people, and it's something I say all the time, but if they're still breathing, there's still hope. Period. I think the best thing anyone ever told me is, like, don't be realistic. And I think most of my life has been a testament to just not being realistic. It's not realistic that you should be dead for 5 minutes and come back and not at least have significant brain damage. It's not realistic that my life would look the way it does today, when in 2017, it looked like I was ranching cattle, stealing Percocets, doing cocaine, and drinking whiskey by the literal gallon, living in my then girlfriend's parents' house, which is just a fancy way of saying I was homeless, right? Don't be realistic and just try.
When you think about that period and where you are now and everything that you've shared today, what do you hope people take away from today's conversation?
That there's a way out. I still think there's too many people who just have never made that connection, either because nobody's shown them, nobody's told them, or once again, maybe they're like me and they never really actually gave this thing an honest shot. Like, if there's one thing I want people to take away from today's episode, it's just that, like, hope is there. Like, but you have to ask for it and you have to reach for it, right? Because when I did that, I had a dozen guys reaching their hands back out to me. That's it. And they took me through the process, holding my hand the entire way until I was ready to let go of their hand, not the other way around. And when I was finally ready to let go of their hand, they showed me how to find some other people to hold their hand and take them through the same process.
How did you learn to trust them and trust yourself in that way?
I think for me, I didn't really have much choice because I already didn't trust myself, because I knew what myself was going to do despite my best intentions to not do it. I knew, for instance, if I left that hospital, I knew I was going to be drunk and getting a bag of blow within 30 minutes. For sure. I knew it. So I didn't trust me, and I definitely didn't trust whatever this God thing was that people keep talking about at the time. I didn't really trust anybody, but I trusted that these guys believed that what they were doing was working for them. And I was like, I don't like it, but I'll bite. What do you guys got going on over here? Will you show me? And they did.
I think the thing that is just so powerful about the story that you've shared today, for me at least, is your continued pursuit of helping others and utilizing everything that you've learned as well as trusting the right people in the right moments. And it can't be easy to talk about these things. And I also believe that talking about them helps us continue to reinforce the hard work that you have definitely, as you've discussed today, put in, but also as a reminder of how far you've come and how much you have done to change your life. And you've done it. Like, you had, yes, you can put your faith in someone else to bring you out of the hole that you were in, but you had to learn to walk again. You had to learn to trust yourself and trust who you are to be able to continue down that path. And I think, as you said, it's, yes, if you look at it as the whole picture of, okay, I'm getting into recovery, it means all of these things, versus, okay, the first step is I don't trust myself, I have to trust someone else. It becomes more manageable to look at and more manageable to understand what you're attempting. And instead of that overwhelming feeling of I have to find recovery versus I just have to take the first step.
It's accurate.
When you think about your journey and throughout your life, what is something that someone has told you that has impacted your life and you'll never forget?
There's a guy named Robbie, and he explained it to me one day, but at the same time, he would always ask me the same question. He would say, "What are you afraid of?" And he would say it just like that. And I would tell him, and then he would always say, "And? What's your point?" But when he explained it to me, I always think of him. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Because his whole point was, you're not scared. Think about it. He's like, every fear you have, write them all out. And I did, begrudgingly.
Snakes would be at the top of my list.
Oh, man, that was a whole process in itself. Because, I wanted to do the, alpha male, tough guy. I mean, I ain't scared of nothing. He goes, "Oh, really?" He goes, "What about loud, barking, big, unchained dogs?" And I was like, I mean, intimidating, but like everybody. He's like, "Not everybody, you." I was like, all right, yeah, a little bit. He's like, "What about coiled up rattlesnakes?" I was like, "Yeah, but everybody." He's like, "Not everybody, you." All right, yeah. And he would keep going and going and going, and eventually what we realized is this list would have been shorter to just write what I'm not afraid of than what I am. But his whole point was everything I'm afraid of I've already been through. And his whole point was, are you not perfectly fine? Matter of fact, aren't you even better having gone through that as a result? And I think about him and him saying that a lot when I start to get scared, I start to get in fear, things start to get really stressful, really foreign situations I'm not used to, life events, et cetera, et cetera. And I always think of Robbie. What are you afraid of? And just this whole point of like, man, you've already done this. Same fear, different context. You're fine. And for whatever reason, that's always stuck with me.
And it's facing your fears head on versus hiding from them or not acknowledging them.
Yeah. And every time it's like that one saying, fear is, it looks like an ocean, but it's only a mile long and an inch deep. You just walk right through it. Won't even get your socks wet.
The fear is more overwhelming than the actual thing you're afraid of.
Exactly. Exactly.
As I say this, I am trying not to take on the fear, but we're going to turn the tables now.
Okay.
And you can ask me any question you'd like.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping it's not something that you've already been asked 100 times.
Go for it.
I'm afraid it might be, but at the same time,
no fear.
What keeps coming to my mind right now is, how long did it take you, and how did you find the courage to come on a platform like this with a microphone 3 inches from your mouth and actually open up and use the voice that you have and the experience that you've had on both sides of that coin? How did you get there? Because I wish more people would. And part of that is selfish and part of that's probably unselfish. But at the same time, that's a big hurdle to get. At least it was for me.
Yeah. There was a lot of fear. I'm going to cry just from the question. There was a lot of fear in my life around who I was supposed to be, who Charlie was. And I've been through things, some of which I've talked about on the podcast, some of which I haven't talked about yet, but am open to, that I was living my life in what felt like Groundhog Day, whether it was repeating the same relationships that I had with a parent or repeating different patterns with friends or whatever it was. And I was so disassociated from reality in terms of who I was. I felt like I was just there to support other people, to help other people. And I didn't take myself into account at all. And I started group therapy after switching therapists. And it was one of the most difficult decisions I had made to that point, because I had such social anxiety around being around anyone and sharing anything about myself. I could sit and talk about other people, help other people, but I couldn't do the same thing for myself. And as I went into group therapy, it triggers everything. You trigger other people trigger you. And there was a moment where I was so triggered that I thought something occurred over the course of 5 minutes that actually occurred over the course of 50 minutes. And I was so afraid of the anger that I had in that moment, not because I had hurt anyone specifically, but I was afraid that it would. And I had so much anger at myself and around not feeling heard. And I think when I look back at my journey, although different, I can relate to the disassociation. I can relate to compartmentalizing my life. I can relate to those really dark moments where you feel like you have no purpose and there's no reason that you should still be alive. And also feeling like there has to be a reason that I went through some of this stuff. And the point that it changed was built up over time, but it was a point where I felt like I wanted to share my story more to help other people than I was afraid of what people would think. And I think that was building and building and building. And I had built a lot of strength leading up to the first episode that I did. And those first 4 episodes where I shared so much of my story, stuff that my mom didn't know, my brother didn't know, stuff that I couldn't even put to words and tell my therapist until maybe 6 months prior. I would allude to things about being depressed or suicidal, but I would never say the words because it carried so much shame for me. And those first 4 episodes were so liberating. And each time I recorded one and it aired, I felt lighter. And it was the most beautiful feeling. And because I had kept so much of it so close to the chest for so long, there was also almost a re-traumatization because I had never spoken those words outside of therapy. And I had never talked about so many of the things. And I think that for me, it's not going to be a podcast for everyone. It's not going to be a book or something necessarily as public facing. But at the end of the day, I think it's more about being honest with yourself first and foremost, and starting small and being honest with one person about something that scares you, honest about something that you hold shame around, and talking about it. And so, as a very long way around it, I think for me, it was this is what felt right for me. But whatever that is, it's about finding your voice and standing up and sharing your story authentically as you have, and owning every part of it. There are things that I'm not proud of. There are apologies that I have had to make, but those also make you stronger if you learn from them. And so I think it's that combination of learning and facing whatever fear it is head on. And I wouldn't change it for the world.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me on.
This was an unbelievably powerful conversation, and I'm so thankful that you were willing to share so much of your life and continue to do that.
I appreciate you, really. Thank you so much again for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. This has been, some tough questions, man, but I'm happy to do it.
I appreciate that you shared, even though they were tough questions, and thank you. That's it for today's episode of TURTZED, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe or follow button, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And if today's episode got you thinking, laughing, crying, or maybe even rolling your eyes, write a review and tap to rate. Now let's be real. This convo doesn't end here. Hit us up on socials and don't be shy. Slide into our DMs. We love to connect. Thanks for hanging with us today, and catch you on the next one, because our journey together is just getting started. Remember, stay curious, live authentically, and keep turtzing it up.